Piper Alpha. The Piper Alpha platform stood like a floating city out in the brutal North Sea, 120 miles off the coast of Aberdeen. Built in 1976 by Occidental Petroleum, it started as an oil rig and later switched gears to bump out natural gas too. By 1988, it was producing nearly 125,000 barrels of oil a day. That's around 10% of the entire UK's output from the North Sea. That kind of scale meant millions in profits, but also a tightly wound system of pipelines, gas flows, and heavy machinery with very little margin for error. And then came July 6, 1988. A small maintenance job turned into a full-blown catastrophe. Someone had taken off a pressure safety valve for recertification but didn't tell the night shift. That pump A, was sealed up with a hand-tightened cover. No one flagged it. So when Pump B failed, the crew tried to fire up Pump A. Gas came rushing in. The cover gave way. Seconds later, gas was hissing out under pressure. Then came the explosion. The blast ripped through the rig like paper. The control room was flattened. Pipelines from Tartan and Claymore kept feeding fuel to the fire. Alarms went dead. Lights failed. People ran through fire and smoke. Some had no choice but to leap 175 feet into the icy black waters. Others waited for helicopters or rescue boats like the MSV Theros and MV Silverpit. But the inferno didn't stop. One pipeline after another blew. Tartan at 10:20 p.m., MCP-01 soon after, then Claymore at 11:20 p.m. Finally, just before midnight, the whole rig collapsed. 167 men died. Only 61 made it out alive. The losses hit $2.04 billion, nearly $7 billion today. No one went to jail, but the Cullen inquiry changed offshore safety forever. Alexander L Keeland. On a foggy, storm-thrashed night in the North Sea, March 27, 1980, over 200 men were winding down inside the floating rig Alexander L Keeland. Dinner, movies, card games, routine things on a giant steel hotel for oil workers. But at 6:30 p.m., that normal night shattered. A sudden, sharp crack. The entire platform trembled. Seconds later, it tilted hard, 30 degrees, and then stalled like a stunned animal. One anchor cable held her steady. Barely. When that final cable gave out at 6:53 p.m., the entire rig capsized, swallowing 123 lives. The rig had been built in France for $44 million, named after a Norwegian author, and was moored beside the Edda platform. It had been housing workers for Phillips Petroleum, an American company. 7 lifeboats were on board, but only one worked as intended. A safety lock on the lifeboat cables meant to prevent accidental releases trapped most of them. Rafts floated aimlessly. Rescue ships were late, and one standby vessel took a full hour to arrive. The fog was so thick. Rescuers heard people screaming but couldn't find a single body in the water. When Norway investigated, what they found was chilling. The rig collapsed due to a small, shoddy weld just 6 millimeters thick on a sonar bracket, not even load-bearing. That tiny crack had festered with time and the North Sea's constant pounding, ultimately causing one leg of the platform to fail. And without structural redundancy, it was a domino effect. Everything followed. The disaster changed offshore safety forever. Lifeboat regulations were rewritten, chains of command became strict. They even built a 5-ton sculpture, a broken chain onshore as a memorial. What's even more haunting? 18 months later, another rig, Ocean Ranger, went down in almost the same conditions off Newfoundland. It was like the ocean was keeping score. Deepwater Horizon. On a quiet April night in 2010, about 41 miles off Louisiana's coast, something went horribly wrong. The Deepwater Horizon, a floating titan designed to drill at depths of nearly 10,000 feet, suddenly became a death trap. Methane gas shot up from a well known as the Macondo Prospect, igniting a massive explosion. In an instant, 11 crew members were gone. The rig burned for 2 days before sinking into the Gulf of Mexico, leaving behind an underwater geyser of crude oil that no one could stop. For the next 87 days, the Gulf bled oil, over 4.9 million barrels of it. That's around 210 million US gallons. It spread like a cancer, reaching coastlines from Louisiana to Florida. Tar balls showed up in Tampa Bay. Beaches were ruined. Sea life suffered brutal consequences. Infant dolphin deaths soared. Fish like tuna and amberjack developed horrifying heart defects, and the entire food chain began to warp. The oil didn't just choke the water. It poisoned what lived in it. The cleanup effort was massive. 47,000 people, 7,000 vessels, over 4 million feet of floating barriers. They tried everything. skimmers, controlled fires, and even injected nearly 1.84 million gallons of corksit dispersant directly at the leak. That move, meant to break up the oil, sparked its own controversy due to the toxicity concerns. For all that, the first partial success didn't come until a riser tube managed to capture some 924,000 gallons of oil. By the time the well was finally sealed, BP had paid out over $65 billion. In 2016, the company agreed to a $20.8 billion settlement, the largest environmental payout in US history. Investigators blamed bad cement, faulty decisions, and cost-cutting. The Gulf paid the real price, and it's still paying. Bohai 2. In the early hours of November 25, 1979, in China's Bohai Bay, a brutal storm swept across the sea. On board the Bohai 2 oil rig, a crew of workers faced what would become one of the deadliest offshore drilling disasters in China's history. The platform, designed with extendable legs to stabilize operations, was suddenly at the mercy of violent winds and towering waves. As nature unleashed its fury, the rig began tilting, alarms rang, and panic set in. Despite desperate efforts by the crew, the platform couldn't hold. It capsized and sank, killing 72 people. Only the jagged tips of the jack-up legs were left peeking through the surface. The tragedy didn't come down to just one problem. The storm was ferocious, yes, but the rig itself had weaknesses. A ventilator pump, knocked loose by the waves, tore a 1-meter hole into the deck. Water surged in fast. Equipment hadn't been properly secured. Safety procedures were sloppy, and in the chaos, people didn't know where to run or what to do. Life-saving equipment failed when it was needed most, and training had been far too limited. The rescue effort? It barely got off the ground, crippled by the same brutal weather that sank the rig. The fallout was massive. The rig was gone. China's oil operations in Bohai Bay were thrown into disarray for months, and crude oil spilled into the sea, threatening local ecosystems. But the most painful loss? Dozens of lives, wiped out because corners had been cut. Since then, the lessons have echoed across the industry. Offshore rigs need to be built tougher. Workers must be trained like their lives depend on it, because they do, and emergency plans should be airtight. One rig going down in a storm changed everything, but it cost 72 lives to do it. Mumbai High North. On July 27, 2005, one of the deadliest offshore disasters in India's history unfolded 62 miles off the coast of Mumbai. It started with a simple medical emergency. A cook aboard a support ship, Samudra Surakisha, sliced off the tips of 2 fingers. In any normal scenario, a helicopter would have airlifted him, but that day, the Arabian Sea was raging 25-foot waves, winds gusting at 40 miles per hour, and currents that didn't care about human plans. So, the injured man had to be transferred by a crane basket from the nearby Mumbai High North oil platform. The choice proved catastrophic. The Samudra Suraksha approached stern first, using manual controls because the dynamic positioning system had started to fail. With rough seas slamming it from all sides, the vessel was pushed into the platform. It hit a gas riser, basically a massive pipe carrying pressurized gas, and within seconds, a giant jet of fire erupted. The flames leapt from one riser to another, engulfing not only the ship but the entire platform. Fire protection? Non-existent. Rescue plans? Quickly overwhelmed. Of the 384 people present, only 362 made it out alive. 11 bodies were found. 11 were never recovered. The fire swallowed everything. The platform collapsed into the sea. The Samudra Suraksha sank 4 days later, and the damages ran up to $370 million, around $552 million today. The oil flow, which once accounted for 40% of India's domestic output, was cut off for years. There was no public investigation report, but what followed changed Indian offshore safety forever. Risers were no longer left unguarded, fireproofing became a must, and emergency procedures were rethought from scratch. One cook's injury had exposed fatal cracks in the system, and the explosion forced everyone to see them. Chevron Oil Rig. Off the coast of Nigeria, in the heart of the oil-rich Niger Delta, a towering offshore rig suddenly erupted into flames. The KS Endeavour, operated by Chevron Bifo Drilling Company, had been drilling for oil and gas when something went terribly wrong. Out of 154 workers, 152 were quickly located, but 2 were missing, and no one knew exactly what triggered the blaze. Chevron spokesperson Scott Walker confirmed that the rig was evacuated and the injured were flown to safety for medical care. But the fire kept burning. What caused it? Nigeria's state oil company suspects a gas kick. a violent buildup of underground gas pressure that workers struggled to control. Environmental watchdogs called it an industrial failure. Reports from nearby residents claimed workers tried to contain the pressure but failed, leading to the catastrophic fire. Chevron headquarters in San Ramon, California, holds exploration rights over a massive 2.2 million acres in Nigeria and pumped out around 524,000 barrels of crude oil per day from the country back in 2010. At the time, Nigeria ranked as the 5th largest crude supplier to the US, producing around 2.4 million barrels daily. That scale of extraction doesn't come without scars. Decades of drilling have left a web of oily destruction across the delta's creeks and mangroves. Chevron didn't disclose financial losses, but any shutdown in that zone this valuable cost millions. And this fire happened not long after Shell reported its worst spill in over a decade, sending Nigeria into a wave of ecological anxiety. 2 men still unaccounted for, a raging fire offshore, a billion-dollar industry operating on a fault line of human risk and environmental breakdown, and behind it all, a system that keeps drilling, no matter how high the cost. Ocean Ranger. Ocean Ranger was once hailed as the largest semi-submersible oil rig in the world, a 25,000-ton beast engineered to laugh in the face of monster waves and hurricane-force winds. Built in 1976 in Hiroshima, Japan, this floating giant was 396 feet long and nearly as tall as a 30-story building. It had a power system pushing 7,000 horsepower and could drill down to 25,000 feet into the ocean floor. With room for 100 people, it operated across the US, Ireland, and Canada until one brutal winter night in February 1982 changed everything. The rig was working 166 miles off the coast of Newfoundland when a ferocious storm rolled in. Waves reportedly hit 65 feet, and winds reached 115 miles per hour. Sometime after 9 p.m., the Ocean Ranger crew radioed in a chilling problem. A port light, just 28 feet above the waterline, was smashed by a wave, and water had entered the ballast control room. That one breach set off a chain reaction. The ballast system started malfunctioning, valves opening by themselves, lights flickering, the crew unsure what was real and what was a glitch. Then the platform began to list, leaning hard to port. By 12:52 a.m., the crew called Mayday. Just after 1:30 a.m., the final words came through: "We are going to lifeboat stations." And that was it. Ocean Ranger slipped into the freezing Atlantic by 3:13 a.m. All 84 people on board died. Despite launching lifeboats, hypothermia and rough seas killed nearly everyone before help could arrive. Only 22 bodies were ever recovered. Investigators later found the rig had fatal design flaws, poor training protocols, and safety systems that simply didn't work in real conditions. The entire tragedy revealed a terrifying truth. A multi-million-dollar rig with world-class specs was no match for one shattered window and a ferocious ocean. Enchova Central. On August 16, 1984, something went terribly wrong on the Enchova Central oil platform off the coast of Brazil. It started with a high-pressure gas leak, what's known in the industry as a blowout. But this wasn't just some routine hazard. The safety equipment meant to stop it, the blowout preventer, completely failed. And when that gas was met with fire, the result was catastrophic. An explosion that tore through the platform and set it ablaze. Flames spread fast. Panic followed. Hundreds of workers scrambled to escape, but what should have been their lifeline, lifeboats, turned into a death trap. One lifeboat malfunctioned during launch and plunged into the sea, killing 36 men in one horrifying moment. In total, 42 lives were lost. This wasn't just an industrial accident. It was a complete breakdown of safety, training, and equipment under pressure. Petrobras, the state-run oil company running the platform, faced months of shutdown, major financial losses, and global scrutiny. Emergency systems that didn't work. Training was inadequate. Evacuation procedures were sloppy. The industry's dirty secret was out. Even billion-dollar platforms can fail in the worst ways imaginable. In the aftermath, offshore oil drilling had to answer some serious questions. Why weren't workers trained better? Why did vital systems collapse so easily? Why were the escape protocols so flawed that they became part of the tragedy? The disaster forced companies across the globe to overhaul safety procedures, invest in equipment upgrades, and, more importantly, put human life first, at least on paper. Today, oil rig workers are told to report every malfunction, attend every drill, and stay mentally sharp on the job. But when platforms are floating cities surrounded by flammable gas and water on all sides, safety isn't just a checklist, it's a survival strategy. And when it fails, the price isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in lives. Usu Masinta jackup rig. On October 23, 2007, the Gulf of Mexico witnessed one of the deadliest oil rig disasters in recent memory. The Usu Masinta jackup rig, An enormous mobile platform designed to plant itself on the seafloor and drill was working just off the Cab 101 platform when disaster struck. As a brutal cold front rolled in, winds howled at 80 miles per hour and the waves rose more than 26 feet high. The sea wasn't just angry, it was unforgiving. The rig lost stability and smashed into Cab 101, knocking loose a production valve. That's when gas started to leak. The crew scrambled to stop it, but the leak worsened and caught fire. Flames and panic spread fast. Workers tried to evacuate, but the lifeboats and rafts, cheap, ill-prepared, and frankly, a death trap, were no match for the churning sea. Many flipped over, plunging terrified workers into freezing waters. 22 people never made it back alive. One was never found. And that wasn't the end. In the days that followed, containment efforts triggered more fires. The rig's derrick collapsed, more oil poured into the Gulf, about 442 barrels a day, contaminating over 500 tons of sand and polluting the coast. Pemex, Mexico's state oil company, didn't release a full financial breakdown. But between environmental damage, equipment loss, and halt of production, the costs likely soared into the tens of millions. What's worse, this tragedy could have been avoided. Engineers had underestimated the storm. The emergency gear was substandard. Evacuation came too late, and in the middle of all that chaos, sparks from hasty repairs caused more explosions. This wasn't just a freak storm. It was a slow-motion disaster built on negligence, bad calls, and broken systems. The Usu Masinta disaster is a brutal reminder that in offshore drilling, one mistake can set the whole ocean on fire.